I was recently in a producer battle with Nathan Larsen, and I took his song Monster and I made it metal. If you haven't seen that video yet, you can click up here and watch that video now. But if you've already seen that video and you want to know exactly how I did it, this is the video for you. Inside of this video, I'm breaking down everything I did to make that track metal. This is going to be a bit of a long one, so buckle up. I'm going to go into extreme detail. So first thing here is I'm in Studio One. It doesn't matter what DAW you use. It's just I really like Studio One, I like the workflow of it. Now I got most of the stems here from Nathan, and a lot of those were rendered out stems like this, like entire basses, brass was all in one, guitars were all in one, keys were all in one, percussion's all in one. So there's a lot of stems that have a bunch of tracks baked into those stems. I used actually a lot more than I expected to out of this track, and I really, really like a lot of it. So for example, the keys here, there's this like effect there at the beginning, like a vocal hit in a way. There was some really sick opening hits. And then there was the string thing. And so those are what came from Nathan's tracks. And then here in the keys again, there's this like toy box. And so building from that and from the vocals.
Of a monster, what an honor it is just to meet you. My pleasure to finally free you from the world.
Like that just sounds sick to me. That's really, really good. And I've done nothing yet to this track. Being able to build off of that is so, so powerful. So then I already have a structure of the song. So I've labeled out the structure up here, the verses here, the choruses, and then the bridge. And then I have a thing here, which is the pre-breakdown and the breakdown. So actually this breakdown section was not originally in the song itself. The song didn't have a breakdown per se. And so I wanted to add something in there since it's metal. I wanted to add something really, really sick in there. So first off, let's start with the drums. The drums here are Matt Halpern's P5 from Get Good Drums. I absolutely love this library. It's absolutely sick. For metal and for rock, and actually even a little bit of country, it works really, really well. It's just a super nice, clear, punchy kit. And this beginning intro is very, very basic. There's not much going on. In fact, all of the MIDI that I programmed in here is very, very basic. There's not a lot going on. I didn't even humanize anything here. And in fact, a lot of these velocities are very, very similar. And so I actually didn't go too crazy on the different velocities and stuff. And so I have just a couple open hi-hats here and then closing the hi-hats, trying to make it sound like an actual drummer's playing. And then I'm alternating between these two different hi-hats. So I had this one, and that one. And they sound just a little bit different. This one's a bit of a harder hit. And so I'm alternating between these because I'm trying to make it sound like an actual drummer's playing, and I'm just trying to alternate things up just a little bit to make it a bit more natural. And so it's kind of on that accent. As far as mixing goes, this is very, very simple. I'm actually running everything to this bus, and I'm having some very basic mix bus compression and some EQ going on here, and a little bit of a revival to add some thickness and shimmer back into the mix itself. This is the only mixing I'm doing on this drum kit entirely. In fact, most of the mixing is done here inside of GGD. This is not normally what I would do, but it's something that it was very, very quick, and then it sounded good, and so I decided to leave it. But the kit is already mixed here inside of GGD. If I didn't want it to be mixed, I could just turn turbo off, and then it would be the unmixed samples. But I liked the way it sounded when it was mixed, and I didn't feel like I needed to make any like separate adjustments there. And so now I basically am just using this as bus processing on the drums. With that off, and then with it on, So I'm adding some compression, some glue, kind of getting that to punch a little bit here with this distressor, which I have blended in at 30%. I'm really smacking it hard with this and then blending that in to kind of give that punch there. And that distressor is doing a ton. So that's the chain that I have currently for this drum. And now on to the bass. For the bass, I'm using Get Good Drums again, and I'm using the Nolly bass, and I'm actually using the heavy sound on here, so a lot of the processing is done through here. You'll find that I do that a lot if I can. If some of the processing sounds good, I don't necessarily need to run it through my own processing. Sometimes I will, though, depending on the style of the music, but this worked really well for this, and so it's just a very heavy-hitting kind of bass tone. Very gritty. And then I have the humanize up just a little bit, so that way, even though I'm writing in MIDI that's pretty on the grid, it's still giving a little bit of a human element to it here, around 9 to 10 milliseconds. And then I'm bringing the muting noise up about 40% here. And then the next thing I'm adding to this is literally just a bit of compression to kind of get that to poke out in the mix just a little bit more. I'm using a more aggressive style compressor, this 1176. So without it, and then with it. So maybe down here at the bridge is a better example. Off. On. So I'm kind of getting that like flubby pumping sound down at the bottom, kind of to hit and to poke through the mix. And then that overall grit is kind of poking through the mix as well. I liked the Blue Edition because it added just a bit of like mid-range saturation to it. So it worked really, really well for that bass. Now next up I have a clean bass, which is the same thing again, but instead of using the heavy section, I'm actually using the clean section here, and I'm doing something very similar here with the compression, which I'm also using this 1176 in the Blue Strip edition. Off, and then on. I'm just getting that to kind of clamp down in the mix just a little bit more. And it sounds really, really good. It's super snappy, and I really like the sound of that. And the one thing that I was adjusting here was the sub in tone, because this actually was a dingwall that they had sampled. And dingwalls are very, very bright and crisp, and so I wanted to turn the tone down a little bit for it. So for example, this is what the dingwall would sound like with none of the tone adjusted at all. It's super bright. And so I kind of wanted to control that a little bit, and then bring the bass up just a touch. So that high end's coming down just a bit, and then that sub low end is going back up just a little bit because I didn't want it poking through the mix. In the context, was listening by itself, it actually sounds great, but in the context of the mix, it was very obnoxious and it was in the way. So I'm actually going to bring this back up in the mix itself.
Fall asleep.
That's obnoxious. And so if I bring it down here, like around -5 dB, I'm actually tucking it in the mix a little bit more, but it's still very present.
Be careful now if you fall asleep, 'cause nothing is
Way better. Sits in the mix like it's supposed to, and it's not poking through and being too obnoxious. Now, the next thing is guitars, and these are what the guitars sound like. And then I have some riffage going on over here. So the guitar is actually the one that's hanging there on the wall, which is the Jackson PC1, the Phil Collins edition, and I really like that guitar. It's got a humbucker in the bridge, which was the most important part of the whole thing. I needed a humbucker to really kind of like have that grit and thickness to it. And then it's in a drop tuning, which made it super helpful to actually bring it to the key of the song. And I actually did some tuning later on inside of the session itself, and I'll show you that here. Inside of the session here, I'm using THU Slate to actually bring the pitch down by 4, because the guitar over there is tuned to drop C, and I needed it to go down even lower. So I was able to actually bring it down 4 semitones here by using the pitch shift inside of THU, which I think is like one of the best pitch shifting sounds for guitar in general. It just sounds really, really great for guitar. I know it's made for guitar, but it just works phenomenally well. And so without it, it sounds like this. And then with it. And so it just sounds really, really great. It was able to put it in there, and I didn't have to reset up my guitar and have to retune it and everything like that. And I did the same on the other side as well, because everything needs to be in tune. The next thing I did was I used STL Tonality's Will Putney. I absolutely love this plugin, and I was using Amp 2, and then I was also using this cab here, which is Cab 2, and this thing sounds absolutely insane. And then the microphone sitting there just off the cone just a little bit. Now, what a lot of people don't know is the cab itself actually plays more of a role on the overall tone than the amp itself. It's such a big deal, and most people skip this. Let me show you what I mean. So here, if I was to just start playing around with different cabs, even though the amp itself is going to stay the same, I'm going to change the cab. It changes the tone drastically. So this is cab 2. This is cab 1. Cab 3. Cab 4. So listen to the difference between those 4 cabs. It was absolutely drastic. The difference between 1, 2, 3, and 4 was insane. It almost sounded like I was playing through different amps, but I was doing nothing else but switching out the cab itself. If you are a guitar player and you use guitar amp simulators, especially like this, pay attention to the cabs that you're using, especially if you're in the metal niche, Where you place the microphone makes a big difference too, but not nearly as much as the actual cab that you're using. One of my favorite places to put the mic, though, is just off the cone, because that's right where you're going to get the brightest tone. This is right where you're going to get the darkest tone. And just off the cone, you get a really nice mid-range kind of boost and grit to it. So I'll show you what I mean. Super bright and brittle. Got that mid-range boost. And then it gets super dark over here. Kind of scooped, actually. But I love this mid-range kind of boost right here. One thing you could do to get your guitars to sound even wider, which I didn't do on this, but you could, is to actually use the same amp and same cab, but you can use the cab mics in different positions. So let me shift this off to the side a little bit. So even though the amp and the cab's the same, I'm actually changing the mic position of the cab on the right side. And so I'm actually making this sound wider than it actually is. So now they're both the same. Even though they're 2 separate takes, they still sound wide and super nice. But if I actually play around with the mic position, I can make it sound even wider. And then in the context of the mix, it sounds great, but I didn't do that for this mix. Next up, I have the ARPs that I'm layering on top of the rhythms. So I actually played this on my Fender Telecaster, and I didn't do any tuning afterwards whatsoever. I just found the notes, arpeggiated those, and then just recorded them in. I had a track on the left and a track on the right. It was very, very simple. So then both left and right tracks here. Then I have one panned hard left and one panned hard right, just like the rhythm guitars. So things should sound super, super wide. So far, we have basically everything that we need. So we have guitars, we have the bass, and we have the drums, which sounds like this. Sounds really, really great. And so for metal, that's mostly all you need. But if you want to actually take your metal productions to the next level, you want to add a lot more production elements to it to really get it to stand out in the crowd. So the next thing I did was I added a lead guitar, or what they would call a production guitar, which sounds like this. It's got a lot of delay on it. It's got a lot of reverb. I have some EQ to get it to sit right in the mix like I want to. I'm scooping out some of the mids, or actually some of the low mids, and then boosting around 1K to kind of get it to set where I want it to. And then here I am using Will Putney's tonality plugin again here. And for the amp, I'm using Amp 1, and for the cab, I'm using Cab 1 here, which sounds great. And then I am boosting some of those pedals here, which is the distortion here. And then I also have the delay pedal on, and I have this set to pre, meaning that it's going before the amp itself, meaning that every delay hit is going directly into the amp. The delay is actually getting distorted. It's not a distorted sound getting delayed, it's the delay sound getting distorted, and it makes a massive difference in the way it sounds. Let me turn off everything else except for that, and let me switch this switch here, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. So that's with it set to pre. Now this is with it set to post. It's a completely different sound, even though I'm not changing much besides where this is going in the chain itself. So I like to set it to the pre, so that way the delay is actually being sent into the amp. I just like the way the delay sounds when the delay itself is getting distorted. Then I have another delay here, just to kind of add some width to it. And then I have some room reverb, which sounds like this. And then I have some EQ to set it in the mix exactly where I'm looking for. So without that lead guitar, sounds like this. And with it, makes a massive difference, and it just helps boost the overall quality of the song itself. Next up, I have some impacts and risers, and you just can't go wrong with these things. And I've really done nothing to these except for add a little bit of a low cut here, just because I don't want that riser to have as much low end as that impact, because when that riser comes in, I want that tension to kind of be building, and then that tension to be released here on that impact. And I need to make sure that this riser doesn't have a lot of bass in it. And so I've done that here. And that riser is identical to the impact here. I've just literally reversed it. That's all I've done, reversed it and then cut it here. Next up, I have some short strings that I added. And I'm using the Free Orchestra. I absolutely love it. It's Project Sam, absolutely incredible. And their whole library that they have here is insane. Absolutely love everything they do. And I have a choir here as well, which is also from Project Sam's The Free Orchestra. It's incredible. I can't believe they're giving this stuff away for free, and it works right inside of Contact, which is nuts to me. So it works really, really well, and I loved everything that they've done here. It's sick. So if you don't have that, definitely go check that out. And so those strings and the choir sound like this together. And then I have this super suspenseful riser here, and I wanted it to sound super creepy, just to kind of add some tension there before we go into the chorus. And so with the impacts and the strings and the choirs, it sounds like this. Then of course, when we bring the guitars and the bass and the drums back in, now I wanted an extra punch out of that snare, but not every snare hit. So what I found was I found this snare sample, added a ton of reverb to it, and then I actually reversed that sample here, and then put it right before this hit. So I'm kind of adding some tension there. And then layered with the drum itself. I love adding reverse snares in especially metal. Just sounds really, really great. Now, that is basically it for everything that I've done besides the actual vocals itself, which I added some screams in as well. And so it's sounding really, really great. I have all of these other layers that I added in that came from Nathan, which sound like this here. Like if I just play that and the bass, then the guitars, It sounds ridiculous. I love it. And then the last thing is the vocals. So, of course, there's nothing that I did to the vocals themselves. I did a little bit of EQ and then just a little bit of saturation and some compression to get it to set in the mix just a little bit better. The mix he sent me was phenomenal, but for metal, I wanted to saturate the vocals and make them sound just a tad distorted. And I would never do this for any other genre besides really something aggressive like this.
Monster, monster, now that you're a
So without any saturation or compression here,
goner.
and then with some compression,
Welcome to the life
and then with a little bit of saturation,
of a monster. Now that you're a goner.
without the saturation,
Welcome to
and then with
the
it.
life.
So I'm adding just a bit of that saturation, a bit of that distortion, just makes it sound sick in the context of the track itself. And then I have just a little bit of EQ, cutting some of these frequency ranges where a lot of that bass and that guitar is going to sit. So I just wanted to clean the vocals up just a bit there for the metal guitars, which is actually kind of a bummer. I had to make a decision there of the guitars were starting to get lost, and I had to make a decision of whether I just allow that to happen or I start to find some frequencies that are fighting with the guitars, and it ended up being some of the vocal stacks. So that was a decision I made, and I think they sounded phenomenal the way they were, but I need to get the guitars to poke through the mix just a little bit more. And so that's what I ended up doing.
Monster, monster, you can be a monster. Can only wonder what it's like. Monster, monster.
And then finally, I have the screams and then this atmospheric layer here. And we'll start with the atmospheric layer that I have, and I only added it for this breakdown section, just to kind of give a lot of suspense here. It sounds like what I would imagine a bunch of engines running at the same time. It sounds awesome. Without it, and then with it. Just adds a lot of tension there. Now for the screams themselves, here I have 4 different screams, which are the fry screams. I have one on the left, one on the right, one on the left, and then one on the right. And then I have 2 other screams here. So that fry scream is more of that high scream, which is like a yeah kind of sound. And then that guttural scream, which is what most people are used to hearing, is that low kind of sound, which I'm way better at the fry scream than I am the guttural scream. But being able to layer both of those makes things sound super sick. So here is the guttural scream, and then here's the fry scream. And then layered together, just sounds super, super cool. And then the 4 screams here are all fry screams. Yeah. And I'm just saying, yeah. Yeah. And then it's going right into that breakdown.
Yeah.
So the guitars here during this breakdown sound like this. I have 2 separate sections, which is one is the rhythm, and then the other is the like pinch harmonics. And so I like that little like digga-digga, digga-digga, and I wanted one to hit the left ear, one to hit the right ear, and then that to follow the drums themselves. And then right there I have that impact that hits. Now, because I'm using MIDI bass for this, I ended up having to pitch bend those notes here at the beginning, because you can hear how in the guitars, I'm pitch bending those notes. Like, bow, wow. And so I needed to do the same thing with that bass. And so I just automated this like little pitch bend up and down here. And then over here in this last section, I brought in Nathan's strings here again. But I would needed just to repeat that part, because if I continued after, it changes keys. So, but because that drop was doing nothing else except for that specific key, I just replicated it like this. So it's playing the same one over and over again.
Can only wonder what it's like.
And then for here, towards the end, I had this riser and everything kind of build back up. And then I just wanted this absolute metal just breakdown here at the end, which sounds like this.
Welcome to the life of a monster.
Which is real simple. I have the bass just hitting the up octave and down octave. I have the guitars doing the same thing. And then I have the drums basically doing a like get it. And then with a flam there at the end. And then I am just doing some nasty screams here, some fry screams. One on the left and one on the right. If you've noticed, I double track a lot of stuff. And then with a ton of room reverb on it. Now, one of my favorite plugins to use on screams is Faturator by Kilohertz, which is this like TV screen looking thing. And it's supposed to add this like TV static sound to things. It's freaking nuts. Like, let me just show you without any reverb at all. And then let me just solo the left one here. So without it, and then with it, it just sounds so sick on freaking screams. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Monster.
Freaking love it. The last thing I did was I added this little creepy laugh.
Yeah.
And I wanted that to go back into that breakdown, which that laugh was actually back here.
Yeah.
And I wanted that to come back over here during this breakdown.
Yeah.
So that was my full walkthrough of how I remixed the song Monster by Nathan Larsen and turned it into metal. If you got some value out of this video, definitely click the subscribe button. And if you want to see me take AI vocals and blow some musicians' mind with it, you're definitely going to want to click on this video over here. I'll see you there. And now, as always, go create.